If you like my videos and want to help me make more of them and faster, consider joining my Patreon. Thanks. About a month ago, the 6 million subscriber YouTube channel H3H3 Productions released a video called Content Nuke Hasan Piker. In this video, the host, YouTuber Ethan Klein, alleges that the political streamer Hasan Piker is an extremist that supports terrorism and terrorist groups.
And over time, I started to learn that my co-host, he really likes terrorists.
Promotes anti-Semitism and is radicalizing his viewers to do the same. He accuses Hasan of being a rape denialist and goes on to accuse him of prolonging what he calls the Israel-Palestine conflict with his radical views.
This conflict will never end until people realize that Palestinian liberation and Israeli security are not mutually exclusive. You need both, and it can be done, but not while people like Hasan lie, propagandize, and incite hate. It's people like him, ironically, that prolong the conflict indefinitely.
In this video, Ethan also criticizes Twitch, the platform that Hasan streams on, accusing the company of having a systemic problem of anti-Semitism. He cites the company's open support of Hasan, its sponsorship of a live event that Ethan claims was anti-Semitic.
I feel like this is indefensible, blatant, obvious anti-Semitism, and this was greenlit by Twitch to appear on their main stage.
And its alleged discrimination against Jews through a recent ban on new account signups from Israel. So I'm going to tip my hand a bit here and say at the outset that this video is quite possibly the worst video I've ever seen. It's plagued with factual errors, misrepresentations, contradictions, and overt pro-Israel Bush-era U.S. State Department propaganda. For a more thorough breakdown of all of this video's problems, I'd recommend the YouTube channel Bad Empanada. He's gone point by point with these and debunked them, many of them months prior to the release of Ethan's video. Hasan himself has also responded to most of these claims also months ago. I will leave these videos linked below in a playlist. Given the existence of these dozens of other responses, I'm not here to repeat their arguments. You can just go watch them. No, the real reason I'm talking about Ethan's video today is less about what he says in it and more about what he doesn't say, the things he chooses to leave out. Save for a passing mention of an outdated, vastly underestimated death toll of Palestinians in Gaza, Ethan omits the Palestinian side of the story entirely. He doesn't talk about Gaza. He doesn't give any specifics about what Israel is doing there. And this is an issue for a few reasons, but mainly, all of the points he raises are directly tied to the Gaza genocide. The main targets of this video are some of the only groups in the world that have violently resisted Israel's genocide, and the few figures in independent media that are willing to tell the Palestinian side of the story. By leaving out the broader context, Ethan is able to present a false perception to these millions of viewers about the motivations behind the people his video attacks. He's able to frame them as mindless, terrorist-supporting, America-hating anti-Semites, and not what they really are, which is anti-genocide people that are against genocide. Western media manufactures consent for large-scale terror operations across the globe in a number of ways. There are more overt forms, like atrocity propaganda. There are also more subtle ways, like deceptively framing information, using passive language, and creating false perceptions about conflicts through things like burying the lead and lies by omission. All of these tactics are present in Ethan's video and the wider online smear campaign that motivated it, but it's that last thing that I think does quite a bit of damage, lying by omission. The way Ethan's video is framed seems to imply that Israel's genocide in Gaza is not actually a genocide. He never explicitly uses the term himself, but it's presented as just another thing that's happening in the Middle East that's sad, but ultimately the product of a war. That there are deaths on both sides, and that all we need to have peace is rational dialogue between these two sides. This could not be further from the truth, and to better understand this, we need to talk about Gaza. Thus far, I've been using the term genocide in reference to Israel's actions in Gaza, but it seems like a lot of the people using it on social media here have a general lack of understanding of the gravity of what that term actually means. Genocide isn't just bad thing that's happening where people are dying. No, that's not what it is. It's a Holocaust. The US-Israeli Holocaust. That's what it should be called. Israel is using everything in its power to eradicate Palestinians from the planet. The fact that Israel's actions in Gaza amount to genocide isn't controversial. Not among the experts, at least. This is the near universal consensus among top human rights groups and humanitarian organizations operating on the ground in Gaza that Israel is committing genocide, countless war crimes, and crimes against humanity. There is the Amnesty International report, a 300-page report that accused Israel of genocide in Gaza. There was the Human Rights Watch report accusing Israel of crimes against humanity and genocide in Gaza, specifically through the intentional deprivation of access to clean drinking water. The United Nations, Euromed Monitor, Doctors Without Borders, the International Committee of the Red Cross, Israeli human rights groups like B'Tselem, various Holocaust scholars, they're all saying the same thing. Last year, the International Court of Justice ruled that the case for Israel's genocide in Gaza is plausible. It was a preliminary hearing, and the final rulings on cases of genocide typically take multiple years, but the ICJ issued several provisional measures to prevent the possibility of a genocide taking place, provisional measures which Israel has failed to follow completely. And then there was, of course, the International Criminal Court, who issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who are now wanted international war criminals. Towards the start of his video, Ethan mentions a death toll figure of 40,000 Palestinian people.
Of course, if you compare the raw numbers, Gazans have lost a lot more than Israelis. 40,000 people have died, and neighborhoods have been completely flattened during this war.
The figure he cites is wrong. It's just wrong. Credible estimates have placed the full scale of the slaughter in Gaza at over 65,000 deaths due to traumatic injury alone, with further projections that include indirect deaths in the hundreds of thousands, potentially over 10% of the population of Gaza. Ethan's brief and false citation leaves a lot of other things unmentioned, like how the vast majority of these deaths have been Palestinian civilians, including over 15,000 children. The United Nations described Gaza as a graveyard for children just months into the genocide, and after that, Israel only ramped up its child killing. Ethan does not mention that over 1,200 families have been completely erased from the Gaza civil registry, meaning that every single member of their bloodline has been killed. Nor does he mention that the mass slaughter of these innocent civilians has been intentional. Israel has a long history of intentionally targeting Palestinian civilians for slaughter. This dates back to the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of over 700,000 Palestinians from their land in 1948, which included the massacre of thousands of civilians. And it's also evident in all of Israel's many previous violent incursions into Gaza specifically. During Operation Cast Lead, starting in late 2008 to 2009, Israel slaughtered about 1,400 Palestinian people. 300 of those were children. During this widespread massacre, Israel ordered people to shelter in schools, so-called humanitarian safe zones, then proceeded to bomb the schools and kill people by the dozens. This practice has continued at an even larger scale in the latest escalation in Gaza.
Firas, my brother Firas, he screams. The pain is overwhelming as corpses lie by his feet. These are the moments just after an Israeli strike on a school sheltering thousands of displaced Palestinians.
During the 2018 border protests, or the Great March of Return, which were recognized by human rights organizations as being overwhelmingly peaceful, Israel fired on the peaceful crowds with sniper rifles, injuring thousands and killing hundreds. The UN reports concluded that Israeli snipers were intentionally targeting children, medics, pregnant women, and disabled people. Israeli snipers later publicly, gleefully recounted their experiences of hunting Palestinians for sport, bragging about the number of kneecaps they could shatter. This trend has continued in Israel's latest escalation since October 7th to an extreme degree. IDF snipers are intentionally targeting children for execution by shooting them in the skull and in the heart. Healthcare workers have testified to seeing Israeli drones hovering outside of hospitals, picking off children. That's where they're shooting them and injuring them and then circling back to execute them.
What I think I found particularly disturbing was that a bomb would drop maybe on a crowded, tented area, and then the drones would come down and
Please take your time. We're incredibly grateful.
So the drones would come down and pick off civilians, children. And we had description after description. This is not, an occasional thing. This was day after day after day, operating on children who would say, I was lying on the ground after a bomb had dropped, and this quadcopter came down and hovered over me and shot me. And that's clearly a deliberate act, and it was a persistent act, persistent targeting of civilians day after day. We had 1 or 2 mass casualty incidents every day, and that meant 10 to 20 dead, 20 to 40 seriously injured.
Just hunting Palestinian children for sport. It's pure terrorism. The Israelis also have a history of murdering Palestinian civilians by running them over with bulldozers and tanks. Recall the story of the killing of Kamal Zair from April of 2002. Israeli tanks shot and killed him and then proceeded to run him over. He was 57 years old, wheelchair-bound, and waving a white flag. Another prominent case of this was Rachel Corrie, a 23-year-old American peace activist who was murdered by an Israeli bulldozer while protesting the destruction of Palestinian homes in Gaza. Israelis, for years after her murder, celebrated the day by making pancakes with Rachel Corrie's face painted into them. In the latest escalation, individual Israeli soldiers have admitted to committing these atrocities by the hundreds. The only reason we have these admissions is because Western outlets have written articles with concerns over how the mass murdering affects these soldiers' mental health. Another element to the case that Israel is committing genocide is its continuous intentional deprivation of the basic necessities for life for Palestinians in Gaza. They've been using starvation as a weapon of war, a war crime, and a crime against humanity. Most recently, Israel's response to the quote-unquote ceasefire in Gaza is to continue this mass starvation while explicitly stating it as a matter of policy. They have blocked humanitarian aid throughout the genocide in violation of international law, the ceasefire orders, and the ICJ's provisional measures against genocide. The pretext they've fabricated for this policy of intentional starvation is that Hamas is looting these aid trucks. They have provided no evidence for this claim. What we do have evidence for is that Israel has protected and supported criminal gangs with ties to ISIS in areas that Israel has full control over, and these groups have been looting aid trucks. Israel is intentionally depriving Palestinians in Gaza of access to clean water. Oxfam reported that Israel has destroyed over 1,000 miles of water and sanitation networks, leaving less than 7% of pre-war water levels in Rafah and North Gaza. Israel has also partially or entirely destroyed over 80% of water and sanitation infrastructure in Gaza, including all 6 of its mainline wastewater treatment plants. Brutal, violent attacks on the healthcare system are another aspect of the genocide. They've damaged or destroyed every single hospital in Gaza and murdered countless medical workers, doctors, nurses, rescue workers, and healthcare staff. They've kidnapped doctors and held them without charge, where they've been tortured. Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, Gaza's leading orthopedic surgeon, was kidnapped by Israeli soldiers, brought to an Israeli prison, and then reportedly raped to death. The latest UN reports have concluded that over 90% of the buildings in Gaza have been severely damaged or completely destroyed. If you watch any of the footage coming out of Gaza, this is made quite clear. Israel's destruction includes every single school, hospital, mosque, cultural center, church, residential areas. Everything has been bombed. It's estimated that it will take a minimum of 15 years to remove the debris and unexploded ordinances from the Gaza Strip. That's just removing it, by the way, not rebuilding. In September, the UN released an estimate that because of Israel's illegal and inhumane blockade around Gaza, which regularly limits the transfer of things like concrete into the Strip, fully rebuilding Gaza will take 350 years. Gaza is about 25 miles long and 5 miles wide. It is one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. It is in this area that Israel has dropped equivalent to that of multiple nuclear weapons. Israel has done this with full knowledge that over half the population of Gaza is children. So no, this isn't just a case where 40,000 people died. A lot more than that happened. One of the most tragic elements of the Gaza genocide is that, as crucial as it may be for the factual record and eventually holding the perpetrators accountable, merely recounting these statistics does not afford Palestinians the dignity of humanity. They are simply reduced to numbers, to tens of thousands of names on a registry, as if they aren't human beings with dreams, hopes, hobbies, interests, and love for the people around them. If you've had this feeling as well, I want to recommend a book. It's called If I Must Die. It's written by renowned Palestinian poet, author, and teacher Dr. Rafat Al-Arir. It's full of stories and poetry and history about life, or rather survival, in Gaza during occupation and genocide. It is beautifully written and humanizing beyond anything you'll ever get from most coverage of Gaza, especially in the West. I have a friend from Gaza. His name's Ahmed Sarsour, and he's a very talented poet. We got in contact on social media, and when I read his work, it moved me in a very similar way to the way Dr. Rafat's words have. Ahmed has a sister, Rania. She is a mother and a gynecologist from Gaza and is seeking help after being displaced in February of last year. She and her children were forced to flee their home, and her life was further devastated when her home and her family members' homes were destroyed. She gave birth to her baby, Rose, in a hospital without proper care and no anesthetic, and now faces a dire situation with limited resources. I've linked her fundraiser in the description. Support if you can. The funds raised will go towards essentials like diapers, baby formula, medicine, basic living items, rent, and travel expenses for relocation. Another friend of mine, Ahmed Matar, is a 27-year-old inventor from Gaza. He makes these brilliant videos showing the process of constructing creative inventions to use in order to survive in Gaza. After the so-called ceasefire was implemented, Ahmed and his family returned to their home in the north only to find that it had been looted, vandalized, and destroyed by the occupation forces. Support his campaign if you can. I will leave these fundraisers as well as a link to Dr. Al-Arir's book in the description. The book is devastating, though, especially considering the fate of its author. Dr. Rafat was killed by Israel in a targeted assassination in December of 2023. He was killed alongside his brother Salah, with his son Muhammad and his sister Asma and 3 of her children. This came after having over 30 members of his and his wife's family slaughtered by Israel over the course of their lives. What these numbers also fail to communicate is the weight and depth the effects of this crime has had and will continue to have for generations. To speak only of the children of Gaza, they will forever hold the wounds and trauma caused by Israel's genocide in their minds and hearts. It was reported that when asked, over half of the children in Gaza expressed a desire to die. Many of them already held such wounds, though, of course, but in terms of sheer scale and intensity, what we're seeing now is incomprehensible except to those experiencing it. Throughout these 17 months of genocide, the international community has left the people of Gaza to languish and die. If there's anything we've learned about Israel in the past 100 years, it's that there is no crime they can commit that won't go unpunished, up to and including genocide. In the latest escalation, again, the world has watched this happen and done nothing. And some have, of course, actively made this genocide possible. Most notably, that would be the United States government. The US and the Biden administration is fully complicit in this genocide. They've repeatedly sent billions of dollars in weapons shipments and provided military and diplomatic support. Over 80% of the killing machinery that has been used to slaughter Palestinians in Gaza has been provided by the United States government. They've also provided rhetorical and diplomatic support by whitewashing Israel's crimes against humanity, laundering Israeli atrocity propaganda, and denying and dismissing genocide allegations. That last one should come as no surprise, given that a genocide ruling against Israel does also implicate the United States in the crime of aiding and abetting genocide, since they sent the bombs that made it possible. The ICC is already being urged to investigate Joe Biden and Antony Blinken for their role in perpetrating this very crime. These actions have shown the U.S. to be acting in violation of both domestic and international laws by sending weapons to a regime that is actively and intentionally blocking access to humanitarian aid against a civilian population that they are occupying, and ignoring the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court against Netanyahu and Gallant. This is just another plot on the long chart of the US and Israel's position as rogue states in the international community. There's a comment I saw on Ethan Klein's video. It read, "I feel like a lot of people can't separate Israelis and the Israeli government, and the same with the other side. Like, you are allowed to hate on the people who actually kill people and not hate the innocent adults and children that are being killed from both sides." This is a popular framing among liberals and liberal outlets, that we should separate the Israeli people from the actions of their government. While there are some examples from the past where this may be true, such as the case of the American public's attitudes towards the end of the Vietnam War, which diverged from their government, the same cannot be said in the case of Israel. The vast majority of the Israeli public supports this genocide. Months into the genocide, polling showed that over 95% of Jewish Israelis supported the IDF's actions, with a majority of those indicating that the IDF was not using enough force in Gaza. The force in question there being, genocide. They wanted more. It wasn't enough, apparently. 17 months later, and nothing has really changed. Just weeks ago, polling indicated that the Trump administration's plan to facilitate the ethnic cleansing of Gazans was supported by over 80% of Israelis. This headline refers to Israelis as a whole, but that 80% support statistic is actually only the perspective of Jewish Israelis. A majority of Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, or Arab Israelis, as the Israeli government tries to call them, considers this ethnic cleansing plan to be immoral. When it comes to Jewish Israelis, however, that number drops to just 3%. This should come as no surprise, given Israel's history. A country that exists on the logic of ethnic supremacy and colonization requires a certain level of dehumanization to keep its inhabitants from collapsing under the weight of the reality of their rotten society. Another way to get a handle on the seemingly ubiquitous genocidal fervor among Israelis is by just talking to them.
How many civilians have been killed in Gaza, from what you know?
Who gives a shit?
Okay, but don't you feel like, for example, children?
Children grow up to be Arabs. I read the numbers last week. My memory died and went to heaven. I don't think children should suffer, but they're always casualties. And since they do a lot of pruervu, that is the natural result.
חפים מפשע נהרגו בעזה.
טוב, אז כנראה שנעצור.
את לא רוצה לענות על זה?
תודה.
אוקיי, אפשר לשאול למה?
כי אני לא חושבת שיש מישהו שהוא חף פשע שם. צער.
אבל ילדים אבל, נגיד.
הילדים מסכנים, אין ספק, אבל הם לא יגדלו להיות ילדים חפים מפשע, לצערי.
Most of the kids there that are getting killed I never support little children dying, you know? I never want it. But most of them will grow up not only supporting Hamas, which is a crime by itself, but joining them, which is the worst of the worst.
בפשע נהרגו בעזה.
לא, זה גם לא מעניין אותי.
לא? למה?
לא מעניין אותי, אני הייתי עד 7 באוקטובר האמנתי בשלום ובשיח ובדו-שיח. אחרי זה הבנתי שאין לי מי לדבר, כולם שם מחבלים, לצערי הרב.
אבל ילדים, כאילו.
לא, אני אומרת בכנות, לא מעניין אותי.
There is no such thing as Palestinians. They're Arabs who have many countries to flee to and nobody wants them to. But if we do call them Palestinians, their parents use them as human shields to gain sympathy. The natural instinct of a Jewish mother is to protect her child. Palestinian women do not have that.
These people know that they're on camera and that these remarks will be posted on the internet or shared on the mainstream news. This is normal to them. This is normal in their society, which is a testament to the fact that their society is not normal. It's typically bad form to cite street interviews as being some meaningful indicator of widespread attitudes. But again, with Israel, it's just different. Not just because these attitudes align perfectly with the wider Israeli polling data, but also because it's almost impossible to find anyone in Israel saying anything else. The amount of truly anti-Zionist Israelis living in Israel numbers in the hundreds. This figure is according to anti-Zionist Israelis themselves. They are alone.
Everyone around us are completely genocidal maniacs. Everyone around you. And I don't mean it metaphorically. It's not metaphorically. It's literally everybody. It will be your family. It will be your teachers. It will be your colleagues. Everyone around you. So you're alone. Even if we will gather all of those anti-Zionists together from Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or Haifa or whatever, it will not be more than, I don't know, 500?
There's no tangible internal opposition within the country. The Israeli left is a myth. This is reflected once more in the openly genocidal sentiment we see on social media from IDF terrorists who have been willingly, gleefully, posting their own war crimes on the internet for everyone to see for a year and a half.
They go into the homes of Palestinians, and they're often clearly staying there, and they just smash them up, and they film themselves smashing them up. They also delight in going through women's underwear drawers, and this is a sort of recurring obsession. You have to see Israeli soldier videos in the context of the broader output of Israeli society.
If you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow, I would press it in a second. I would press it right now. Give me that button and press it right now.
There you go.
And I think most Israelis would.
There's an Israeli song called This Was My Home. And what they would do is dress up as caricatures of obviously what they perceive Palestinians to be, being sung mockingly to people who no longer have homes. We're not looking at some sort of obscure subculture within Israeli society. This is mainstream Israeli society.
People have been keeping tabs on this. There are a number of archives documenting the names and crimes of these Israeli terrorists. One of the most thorough of these databases was created by a historian, Lee Mordecai. It's called Bearing Witness to the Israel-Gaza War. It is presently over 120 pages long with extremely detailed footnotes. There's that one tweet that's like, hitting translate from Hebrew on Twitter is like discovering a lost page from Mein Kampf. This holds up pretty well. Here, let's try it on this tweet. The survivors of the 2025 Holocaust are proof that every trace of the murderous mutations in Gaza must be erased, from delivery rooms to the last elderly person in Gaza. 100% dead in Gaza. That there is Barashi Kinneret, the host of a mainstream Israeli news channel. One more example that I found particularly striking was the Right to Rape protests. A group of Israeli prison guards were placed under investigation after security camera footage leaked showing them gang raping a Palestinian prisoner. The Israeli public reacted in uproar, not because of what they were alleged to have done, but because they were potentially going to be punished for it. Protests were held outside of the prison, attended by top Israeli officials. Mainstream Israeli news channels brought on one of the alleged rapist soldiers for interviews, supporting him and his right to kill and rape Palestinian hostages. Again, this wasn't some extremist fluke. It was reflected in broader polling of the Israeli public. According to a poll taken around that time, 65% of Israeli Jews oppose criminal prosecution execution for soldiers suspected of raping Palestinian detainees. And 47% of Jewish Israelis answered that Israel does not need to abide by international law and maintain moral values in the war. Simply put, it's a genocidal society, top to bottom. Perhaps the most complicit party to enabling this genocide, aside from the material support of Western governments, is the Western media. As previously mentioned, this support largely takes two forms: the more overt kinds, like spreading misinformation and explicit Israeli state and IDF propaganda, and the other, more subtle, yet significantly more frequent and effective, is that of manufacturing consent. Reporting on Palestinians has some clear differences in coverage, language, and framing when compared with other groups. In the first 100 days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 262 children were killed. In the first 100 days of Israel's assault on Gaza, more than 10,000 children were killed. The true number is likely much higher, but mentions of child deaths and related terms were 33.4% higher for Ukraine than for Gaza. During this time frame, CNN mentioned child victims of the war 2,446 times for Ukraine versus 2,110 times for Gaza, and MSNBC mentioned child victims of the Ukraine war 1,775 times versus 1,522 times for Gaza. This means that for each child death from Ukraine, children received the equivalent of 16.1 mentions on air, whereas children in Gaza received the equivalent of 0.36 mentions. MSNBC did not run a single segment in the first 100 days that focused specifically and exclusively on the plight of children in Gaza. MSNBC ran over a dozen segments focusing specifically on the plight of Ukrainian children during the first 100 days of that conflict. Emotive language was barely ever used to describe the killing of Palestinians. This comes despite the vastly higher death toll over the same period. On CNN and MSNBC, the words war crime and genocide were mentioned 17 times more in the context of Ukraine than in the context of Gaza. Ukrainian victims were labeled as subject to war crimes or genocide 1,790 times compared to just 104 mentions for Palestinians. And we still see this now, obviously. During the hostage exchanges as a result of the latest so-called ceasefire, for example, you may notice that Palestinians detained without charges in Israeli jails, of which there are thousands, they are referred to as prisoners, whereas the IDF soldiers, that is, actual militants that were captured by Hamas on October 7th, are referred to as hostages. One of the greatest tweets of all time that I've ever seen described the capture of an IDF terrorist during October 7th as him being kidnapped from a tank. Kidnapped from a tank. Kidnapped from a tank. Coverage has been focused almost exclusively on the condition of these IDF quote-unquote hostages, rarely making mention of Israel's contribution to their condition, like how they starve out the population of Gaza, which obviously affects all of the people in Gaza, including the Israeli hostages in Gaza, or the fact that they rain airstrikes on them all day, every day for 16 months straight. Is that good for your health? Is that healthy? The same cannot be said of coverage of the Palestinian hostages. Despite emerging from these Israeli jails with clear evidence of extreme physical abuse, images of the Palestinian hostages are rarely, if ever, shown. The assumption is just granted. It's relied on that they're terrorists, criminals, and whatever else. So whatever happens to them, that's just what happens in jail. The Western media lies in other subtle ways, like burying the lead in stories and deceptively framing headlines. This is especially apparent in coverage of things like ceasefire negotiations. These outlets have consistently framed the lack of agreement to terms as being Hamas's fault, that they won't agree to Israel's terms, but they interestingly decide to use only one definition of the ceasefire agreement, which is Israel's definition, that being one which is only temporary, with no guarantees that the genocide will end after these temporary pauses. They're not really ceasefires, but in order to frame Hamas as disagreeing with them, that's what they have to call them. The ceasefire that ended up being agreed upon in January was the exact same ceasefire that Hamas had agreed to over 6 months prior. Israel continually sabotaged these negotiations, but if you read any of these mainstream outlets, you wouldn't know that, not until the very end of these articles, at least. The latest reporting on these negotiations continued this trend of misleading coverage, such as this story from early February. The majority of the article, headline included, frames Hamas as the instigator to a potential ceasefire failure. However, both independent observers and Israeli officials themselves acknowledged that it was actually Israel who had already broken the terms of the ceasefire agreement immediately after it was implemented. To anyone with a brain and eyes, this would be apparent given the evidence we have of these violations, but because these outlets didn't show their their readers that and also prioritize the input of a party committing genocide. This citation here is crucial for its readers. They need to see this to understand what's happening. But the New York Times waited to mention it until 9 paragraphs in, like basically the end of the article. This is a textbook example of bearing the lead, but it also goes beyond that into just a lie, right? The entire article is framed in precisely the opposite way of what this confirmed fact revealed. If the Times weren't running cover for a genocide, the headline of this article would read, "Israel violates ceasefire, confirmed by Israeli officials." Probably the most insane example of this sort of thing is the following headline, once again from the New York Times. Lebanon's ceasefire appears to hold despite Israeli strike. If Israel struck, they violated the ceasefire. The ceasefire did not hold. Israel violated it. It's just absurd. The genocide is referred to almost exclusively as the Israel-Hamas war. Like the Nazi Holocaust, Israel's genocide in Gaza has been conducted under the pretext of war, but the genocide aspect, of which there is, again, broad consensus has taken place, is omitted from this framing. Every single article that mentions this so-called war should be immediately citing the expert consensus that it really is not just a war, that it's a genocide. That doesn't happen, though. Trump recently made a number of statements explicitly supporting U.S. assistance to the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, including land development by U.S. companies. One tool I found helpful to compare these differences in this sort of coverage is Ground News, who are also the sponsor of today's video. The coverage from right-wing outlets, such as Red State, frames the comments as explicitly positive. Trump and Netanyahu unveiling a bold plan for Gaza and peace. On Ground News, this outlet has a low factuality tag, which means that they often omit key details. Some liberal to left-leaning outlets like New York Magazine, an outlet with a high factuality label indicating they typically rely on well-researched reporting, did explicitly call Trump's proposed plan a case of ethnic cleansing. Other left-leaning outlets centered the extreme nature of his language in the headlines, such as The Intercept, with an article titled, "Trump, the U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip," or the proposed plan's effect on Palestinians, like Middle East Eye, with their article headlined, "We'll own it. Trump wants to make Gaza a holiday hub without Palestinians." Ground News is an app and website that lets you compare media coverage across political biases while calculating each source's reliability so you can see how framing shapes public perception from sources around the world. Without understanding the different biases behind the news you read, you might not realize how skewed the narrative is. Unlike other platforms, Ground News is independent and nonpartisan, so they have no stake in promoting any agenda, just the facts and how those facts are presented. It's not always about how a story is spun, but equally important, as we've seen, is the information that other platforms choose to leave out. Liberal outrage over this story has been almost entirely focused on Trump's comments, but ignores the bigger picture, the fact that it was the Biden administration who made this ethnic cleansing plan possible by facilitating the total annihilation of Gaza, and that it was the Biden administration that proposed this ethnic cleansing plan in the first place. And yet, there's only one source that leads with this crucial piece of context. Ground News made it easy to find the story and have it compared with all the rest. Ground News specifically created their blind spot feed to highlight the stories only picked up by certain politically slanted outlets so you can see the world as it is, not through the partisan narratives these outlets want you to. These are just a few of the ways that Ground News helps me research stories, stay informed, and understand the way information is being presented is just as important as the information itself. I highly recommend checking it out. For a limited time, you can get the same all-access Vantage plan I use for 40% off. It's just $5 a month for a platform that actually encourages you to think for yourself. Go to ground.news/Noah or scan this QR code to sign up today. Thanks again to Ground News for supporting the channel. Now let's get back to the video. When Israelis and top Israeli officials participated in the right to rape protests we talked about earlier, protesting the Israeli right to rape and murder Palestinian hostages, these events were summarized by the New York Times as unrest. They were framed around the protest's effect on the party that was doing the protest, that is, again, the right to rape protest, and not on the fact that Israeli guards raped a Palestinian hostage, it was captured on video, and that the case was clear-cut enough that they actually called for an investigation for once, unlike 99% of previous cases of the IDF abusing, raping, torturing, and murdering Palestinians. In this article, the guards' actions against the Palestinian hostage are described vaguely and passively as just abuse, and it is not revealed until the very end of the article that the abuse took the form of the guards raping the man with an object. The follow-up story on the prosecution prosecution of these soldiers uses this same disgusting framing. Rape with an object is whitewashed in the headline and most of the article as simply just being abuse. This is yet another case of the framing of false neutrality, as this quote-unquote divide between the Israeli right and the Israeli left in this article doesn't actually exist. In reality, all that divide means is that the Israeli right are pro-rape and murder of Palestinian detainees, and the Israeli left thinks it makes their country look bad. There's no real debate going on here. A personal favorite of mine for its sheer absurdity was an article from the New York Times called "It Can Be Lonely to Have Middle-of-the-Road Opinions on the Middle East," which focused on college students that were seeking space for nuanced perspectives on the Israel-Hamas war. The perspective presented in this article is one-sided. They talk about extremism in student movements, but the only example they give for this point is that of the extremist Palestinian activists. The New York Times calls it a war with no reference to the numerous credible allegations of genocide. It's harder to justify having a conversation about nuanced opinions of genocide, so they just call it a war. There's no nuance in genocide. There's nothing progressive about genocide. This tendency to falsely frame a genocide with neutrality will often slip into outright endorsement. Recall Israel's pager terrorist attack in Lebanon when they detonated over 1,000 pagers rigged with explosive. This was a widespread mass terrorist attack that indiscriminately targeted civilians and left hundreds dead and permanently injured and disfigured, including a number of children.
أول شيء أنا كنت إنه قاعد عم بلعب على التليفون وهي إنه فجرت الساعة 3 إنه قبل ما أنا أحملها عم بلعب على التليفون هيك صارت ترن غريبة أنا إنه قمت حملتها حطيت لي إيرور وسهم إنه عشان أكبس أوكي والضوء صار يغبش على الآخر يعني عشان نقربها لعيوننا أنا قربت عشان نشوف شو فيه بس فقعت ما عرفت شيء.
Among those murdered was Fatima Abdullah, a 9-year-old girl. At her funeral, as well as other funerals with large crowds of people, Israel detonated more of these explosives. Despite this being a child-killing and maiming indiscriminate terrorist attack in violation of international law, in Western liberal media it was presented as a cool James Bond-style operation. It was described using words like ambitious, sophisticated, and daring.
The Israeli spy agency Mossad launched one of the most daring and sophisticated deceptions in the history of counterintelligence.
An extraordinary act of espionage, an example of Israel's technological prowess. According to the New York Times, the attack restored the aura of Israel's intelligence agencies. Before covering the attack, these outlets always, of course, make sure to mention Hezbollah's U.S. designation as a terrorist organization. Don't worry, guys, they were just terrorists, nothing to see here. We got the bad guys. They were bad, we are good, mission accomplished. And of course, as we've touched on a couple times, lying by omission. That's another thing. With every previous example, you see it. The Israeli hostages receive wall-to-wall coverage with no mention of the fact that the majority of the deaths of these hostages were a product of the Israeli military through airstrikes or firing on hostages while they were waving white flags, or that on October 7th, Israel issued the Hannibal Directive, killing likely many hundreds of its own civilians as a matter of official policy. One of the really effective propaganda strategies that results from these lies by omissions comes in the case of genocide allegations. Western outlets rarely, if ever, actually mention the numerous allegations of genocide levied against Israel. The few times that they do, they're often brief, unspecific, and accompanied with equivocation or lengthy citations of Israel's defense against the allegations. When the New York Times covered the Amnesty International genocide report, the subheading immediately backtracks into running cover for Israel. Israel rejected the charge, the first of its kind by a major human rights organization, saying it was based on lies. The Times went on to spend more of the article sharing the IDF's defense against the allegations than any of the findings from the actual report. Amnesty International gave us 300 pages of facts about genocide. Israel says that they're just lies. I guess we'll never know what happened here. That's not journalism, that's propaganda. When Human Rights Watch released their report accusing Israel of committing crimes against humanity and genocide through its deliberate deprivation of access to clean drinking water, readers of the New York Times wouldn't have heard about that because the New York Times just didn't report it. That's one of the top human rights organizations in the world, accusing the #1 ally of the most powerful country in the world of the crime of all crimes. And they just forgot? No, they didn't forget. The editorial staff at the New York Times knows that they've helped this. They know that they are complicit in this. So any chance they get to just sort of forget to mention something as consequential as a genocide allegation from the leading human rights group in the world, they'll do it. Of course they will. This tracks with the BBC's repeated genocide denial, evident in repeated instances of reporters condemning or correcting guests for using the word genocide to describe Israel's actions in Gaza.
Israel would deny that a genocide is taking place, saying that it is defending its right to exist. Its very existence, indeed, they would say, is under threat. So there are obviously two sides to this.
This whole issue of right of self-defense has allowed Israel to inflict the mass murder and mass destruction, what the ICJ now describe as plausible genocide. This is not an act of
you know what I'm going to have to say. I'm going to say Israel denies that. They say that they were in pursuit of Hamas terrorists who hid behind their own people.
This is a genocide happening in front of our eyes.
That word, as you know, incredibly emotive, and the Israelis, as you know, will be saying that they are targeting Hamas only, that they don't target civilians.
Not the truth, unfortunately.
Planned, military incursions.
Yes, but it's not the truth.
Yes, civilians are dying.
Civilians are dying, and the way that the bombs are getting dropped, I don't believe are in a targeted way. Nothing from what I'm hearing on the ground suggests that the bombs have been dropped in a targeted way. Our social media manager, all 5 houses around him got blown up. They estimate 100 people were killed in them. Yesterday, his house was the last one remaining in the neighborhood. They leveled an entire neighborhood.
Thank you very much. And I do need to make that qualification, of course, that that it is always denied by the Israelis that genocide is taking place. They say these are strategic planned strikes in Gaza and that they are targeting the militant group Hamas.
But I'm here to let the world know that that's not the case.
Kareem, you've been able to have your say. This is what the Israelis will always say in response to that.
This effort to whitewash and run cover for the genocide has been intentional, of course, and we have the proof. It's been confirmed with direct evidence and testimony, with internal newsroom memos from not only the BBC, but the New York Times as well. And the last thing to talk about is just atrocity propaganda. One of the primary justifications for the genocide in Gaza is that members of Hamas are not just militants, but that they are monsters, pure evil motivated by nothing more than the sadistic hatred of Jews. This narrative has been fueled by stories of horrors that supposedly took place on October 7th. Hamas burned babies in ovens.
They burnt babies alive.
They put children and burned them to death.
They cut the breasts off of women.
400 women shot in the genitals, their breasts cut off as terrorists played with their bloody breasts like a football.
They cut off the breasts of women and throw them around.
They beheaded 40 babies.
I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children.
They behead children.
They cut the fetus out of the womb of a pregnant woman. They committed a campaign of systematized mass rape.
There is no justification for collective rape.
What happened on October 7th was mass, systematic, planned rape and genital mutilation of women.
All of these claims are false, complete fabrications, full stop. No credible evidence has been provided for any of them. Many were shown to be deliberately fabricated, and despite this, they were spread far and wide and ultimately used as rhetorical justification to continue the genocidal onslaught in Gaza. The first major place this narrative broke was Screams Without Words, a front-page New York Times story in late December of 2023. This story came as Israel's actions in Gaza were starting to receive widespread condemnation from the international community. The story was thoroughly debunked. The person who wrote it discredited as being a genocidal Zionist with no history of reporting and self-admitting that the New York Times pushed for this story to come to the public despite the lack of credible evidence. The New York Times podcast, The Daily, shelved the episode due to a lack of credible evidence. But the New York Times never retracted the story, which is because they had no real pressure to do so. The false narrative had already prevailed, and that narrative was consistent with the status quo of the American empire, for whom they are running cover. In July of last year, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeated some of these lies in front of Congress. He received a standing ovation. 3 weeks later, the White House approved a $20 billion military aid package to Israel. They explicitly cited Netanyahu's visit as one of their motivations for doing so. Atrocity propaganda has consequences. So with that context out of the way about the Gaza genocide and its support from the West and within Israel, the broader media system that allowed it to happen, let's now return to Ethan's video. In the content nuke, you can find just about every type of what we just looked at in terms of manufacturing consent. Ethan spreads atrocity propaganda. He shares the Hamas mass rape hoax, the same hoax that was used by the Western media, the US government, and the Israeli government to justify a genocide. He cites the same sources that these parties cite when they go on stage to legitimize more military killing machinery shipments to Israel.
And October 7, last year, Hamas committed horrific acts of sexual violence. Cheryl, I thank you for all your work to bring to light the horrors of this issue and for your film about what happened on October 7.
In his video, Ethan spreads overt misinformation, just straight up lies about Hezbollah and Ansar Allah, or the Houthis, in order to delegitimize their struggle against Israel's genocide. He cites baseless claims from Saudi state propaganda outlets to attack the Houthis. He also cites a documentary about Ansar Allah, which he uses as proof of the claim that they brought back slavery, when the documentary wasn't even about the Houthis. It was about the Yemeni government before the Houthi takeover. He spreads long debunked Nakba denialist talking points that have been used for decades to legitimize Israeli colonization of Palestine. Ethan cites sources that contradict his own claims directly, such as the UN report he claims proves the Hamas mass rapes allegation.
There's a UN report that concludes it happened,
which the report itself denies. He spends 20 minutes in the video smearing a 19-year-old survivor of the US-backed Saudi genocide in Yemen as a terrorist with zero credible evidence. He makes a number of transparently false anti-Semitism accusations, like his claim that Israel's ban on new account signups from Israel was anti-Semitic.
Around the end of the year, when people started talking about anti-Semitism on Twitch, Dan Saltman discovered the Israel ban when he was sent the code proving the block happened.
In reality, the ban also affected millions of non-Jews living in Israel and Palestinians in Palestine, as shown in the evidence he himself cites. The IP ban went into effect in both. Like all these Western liberal outlets, Ethan just takes the State Department line of thinking when it comes to terrorism, which his video is ostensibly a crusade against. By his own definition of terrorism, both the US and Israel are the largest terrorist organizations in the world, given their history of killing millions of innocent civilians across the globe. His focus is not on them, though, rather the groups that they consider to be terrorists, aka, the bad guys. He actually uses those exact words. He says they're the bad guys.
They are a designated terrorist group by the US, by the EU. These guys are clearly the bad guys.
The entire video is kind of a lie by omission, simply because of everything we just went over. How none of it is a factor, how none of the people viewing the video that are unfamiliar with what's happening would ever come away with his video knowing the full picture, knowing some of the very valid reasons why someone like Hassan might be critical of Israeli atrocity propaganda, or might support groups like the Houthis for their heroic actions in the Red Sea against a genocidal regime. The biggest issue, I think, is that Ethan manages to do all of this while still calling himself a stalwart ally to the Palestinians.
I've been a stalwart supporter of the Palestinian cause for many years.
This is what makes liberal Zionism so insidious. He is using humanistic appeals to things like peace and safety, but doing so in a way that distracts from the actual source of the problem. The problem is Zionism and the genocidal Israeli state. That is what's causing these problems. And people that might otherwise be able to understand if presented with the facts of the situation are simply led astray by people like Ethan, where a more right-wing Zionist might put off the average liberal with extremist claims and overtly genocidal language. A liberal Zionist draws you in with the facade of empathy. He wants to appear empathetic, as if he cares for these people, as if he doesn't ascribe to a genocidal ideology. So, in order to do that, he has to lie, and roping in otherwise progressive people into a death cult. Aside from this video being a nonsensical genocidal propaganda piece, it's also entirely unoriginal. The video is a culmination of a months-long campaign against Hassan and all these other creators and Twitch, the company, to smear them as terrorists and anti-Semites and get people, in trouble. The campaign began as a response to the suspension of the live streamer Asmongold. Asmongold made some comments that explicitly justified Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza.
I'm not going to cry a fucking river when people who have genocide that's baked into their laws are getting genocided. They come from an inferior culture. I don't feel bad for them. I don't feel sorry for them. I don't care. I don't support them.
Following his suspension for these comments, a community of large content creators, most notably the live streamer Destiny, along with his fan base, rushed to Asmongold's defense, whitewashing and justifying his comments.
Meanwhile, Asmongold gets a 15-day ban for having a spicy take on the war.
So you have someone like Asmongold who breathes the wrong direction, says the wrong thing, and instantly gets banned.
In this situation, one could, if they were to extend the charitability, could say that Asmongold was probably referring to extremists in the Islamic religion. Extremists in the Islamic religion.
The case of Asmongold's suspension from Twitch was then weaponized against these pro-Palestine voices, most notably Hassan, in an effort to get him deplatformed. To do this, they compiled a number of short clips taken from Hassan's live streams, using them to accuse Hassan of things like supporting and promoting terrorism, allegedly denying October 7th sexual violence, and making anti-Semitic statements. Each one of the clips and their associated accusations can be traced back to prominent posts on Destiny's subreddit. Some of the clips were sourced from videos that criticized Hassan from well over a year ago. These clips were initially hosted on a website created by a member of the campaign called HamasPiker.com. Soon after, another website was created, DanClancySucks.com, a reference to the CEO of Twitch, Dan Clancy. Another goal of this campaign was to get him fired from the company. This site also hosts all of these clips with their associated allegations: anti-Semitism, terrorist promotion, and rape denial. Eventually, several major YouTubers in the usually apolitical commentary sphere made videos that signal boosted these allegations to millions of viewers. Most of these videos used the same clips, many of them directly citing this smear campaign's website.
There's a website known as DanClancySucks.com.
Or there's also a website that's been created called DanClancySucks.com that goes over it all.
Another website, Advertise on Twitch, shows a collection of ads playing before the dishonestly framed clips we've looked at, and the contact information of the companies is provided. It auto-loads a preset email with just one click, allowing participants in the campaign to mass spam these companies with the related smears. There were several motivations behind this campaign. There were direct material incentives. On YouTube for the past few years, there's a big industry that's exploded in popularity, and it's based on a simple concept. Hassan bad, Hassan Piker is bad, and he's dumb, and bad and a terrorist, probably. We can call this the Hassanabi Dunk Video Industrial Complex. It's common for YouTubers during low view months to join in on the fun and make these types of videos, taking short clips from Hassan's thousands of hours of live streaming to misrepresent what he's saying, usually parroting the exact same talking points they're getting from the same YouTubers in the same community. They're watching each other's videos and making each other's videos. It's kind of like a perpetual cycle of dumb guy slop. It's interesting to see YouTubers that typically cover TikTok drama and gaming content randomly giving their opinions on genocide and geopolitics, but that's the result of such an ecosystem. It's not about the politics, it's about making money by attacking a guy they don't like. Because the guy in question happens to be a political content creator, they have to try to do politics. It's really funny to watch, honestly. It's also wild because the political content creator in question is an anti-genocide content creator, and the arguments they're attacking him for are anti-genocide arguments. So these creators, they're positioning themselves in opposition to him and his arguments, de facto positioning themselves on the pro-genocide side. Anti-genocide is pro-genocide. It's quite the precarious predicament they've placed themselves in. Do they realize it? No. Do they care? Probably not. But that's what's happening. That's what they're doing. The success of Ethan's video, which garnered over 3 million views in its first month, is a testament to the algorithmic viability of Hassan bad content. Get in front of a politically illiterate American audience and call a pro-Palestine influencer a terrorist,
promoting hateful terrorist music videos,
terrorist propaganda videos,
terrorist propaganda video,
collect big fat AdSense check. That's how it goes. And Ethan knew it would do well too, and made sure to get a sponsor for the video.
Thank you to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video,
which was a VPN company that happens to be owned by an Israeli billionaire with a history of funding and supporting the IDF. He's not a Zionist though, apparently. Apparently he's not a Zionist, and he's pro-Palestine.
I've been a stalwart supporter of the Palestinian cause for many years.
A few years ago, Destiny was banned from Twitch. Since then, he has repeatedly attempted to be reinstated on the platform, and the latest attempt by using the campaign was probably the closest he's ever been in terms of putting pressure on the platform.
We're tired of your site changing the rules every week. Nobody knows what's going on. Get your shit together, unban Destiny, and fucking make a site that people actually want to go to.
Dedicated the last 2 weeks of my life basically to Steve's cause.
You're talking about the Twitch thing?
Yeah, destroying Twitch.
Some of the motivations for the campaign are political in nature, though, obviously. Hassan Piker is one of the most prominent pro-Palestine voices on YouTube, and this campaign has been orchestrated by Zionists. The website that started this campaign, HamasPiker.com, doubled as a donation page for a prominent Zionist organization. Since learning about the existence of Israel on October 7th of 2023, Destiny has positioned himself as its #1 cheerleader, showing up to debates to defend the genocidal apartheid state using Zionist talking points and denying that a genocide is taking place. On the Lex Friedman Israel-Palestine debate, Destiny justified Israel's slaughter of 4 Palestinian children in the Gaza beach bombings using talking points plucked directly from IDF spokespeople.
Those kids weren't just on the beach, as is often stated in articles. Those kids were literally coming out of a previously identified Hamas compound that they have operated from. They literally did. You can Google it. You can Google it.
With all due respect, you're such a fantastic moron. It's terrifying.
I left Finkelstein's iconic response in there because he is 100% correct. The events of that day were witnessed by dozens of journalists. There is no real dispute as to what happened except from, of course, the party that slaughtered the children, which is Israel, and in turn its propagandists, like Destiny.
A group of boys, cousins, playing on the beach. Now, were running for their lives. Until seconds later, another shell hit. Israel claimed it was firing on Hamas militants at the port, but the dead were 4 young boys.
He's also explicitly called for the genocide of Palestinians.
Honestly, I'm pro-genocide. It sounds really shitty, but I think that Israel should just drop its fucking borders about where it is now, and basically Palestinians can go live in another place. That's really shitty, but that's about where I'm at.
It's this guy and his community who are the source for every one of the arguments that Ethan makes in his video. Do stalwart advocates for Palestinians normally collaborate with advocates for Palestinian genocide? No, they do not, in my opinion. Destiny's podcast co-host Dan Saltman, the other main driver behind this campaign and the one spearheading the creation of these smear websites, is also a Zionist. Saltman promoted pro-Israel organizations like the ADL and stopped anti-Semitism, and Zionist politicians like Richie Torres, who shared and boosted the campaign. He consistently weaponizes Zionist talking points, like asserting that any reference to Zionism is actually just coded anti-Semitic language, the implication there being, of course, that criticizing Israel and Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic. That's a very common Zionist tactic. It's like the Zionist tactic, in the West at least. Perhaps the most significant motivation, though, and indicative of the sort of unserious nature of this campaign, is just spite. These people all seem to have deep personal vendettas against Hasan and these other creators that should give one pause when considering the seriousness of the campaign that they're running.
God, he's so cringe. He's such a cringe loser. I would pay we'd raise $1 million to send this dude to go fight in Yemen, and then all of us would volunteer for the Navy. Holy shit, he's such a cringe.
Destiny has for almost 5 years just obsessively talked about Hasan on his channel. He's made video after video about him. The frequency of these videos increased after Destiny was banned from Twitch. In the span of time since then, he has uploaded almost 80 videos about Hasan out of a total of 450 videos. So that's at least 1/5 of his working life spent talking about Hasan. In contrast, in the same span of time, Hasan has uploaded over 1,200 videos, and he's talked about Destiny a total of 5 times. 5. 4 of them have come in the last few months while covering Destiny's role in this smear campaign and the credible allegations of sex crimes against him. So that's less than 1% of his coverage. This isn't an internet beef. Hasan has a stalker. With Ethan, I feel like I can kind of spot the moment that he started going into this direction, which was the moment that people started calling him racist for saying racist stuff. It was one argument he made where he compared Jewish Voice for Peace anti-Zionist activists to capos.
There was Jewish collaborators with fucking Nazis.
Ethan, don't do that, please. Don't say that the Jews' Voice for Peace are akin to capos. That's...
I'm telling you that the mere existence of Jewish voices it's not a leg to stand on. I don't understand that.
The chat started calling him a Zionist freak because that's a Zionist freak thing to say. And then since then, he's sort of constructed an entire mind prison around the idea that he's not racist, and anyone calling him racist is actually the real racists. And because Hasan's community is politically oriented and is able to spot the racist rhetoric in question, that means they're all extremists and Hasan is leading them, so he's an extremist. And that Hasan and them are all the problem, and that he's a perfect angel, which is the direction he's taken, it seems like.
My only crime is wanting a 2-state solution instead of one, and thinking it's not okay to kill Israeli civilians. That's it. That's why they're calling me a Nazi Zionist.
And now he's just totally gone off the rails. He spends most of his time cowering in fear behind Instagram stories that people can't respond to. Every single one of the uploads on his personal YouTube channel in the last number of months have been targeted towards Hasan. He spent most of his live podcast talking about Hasan and calling him a terrorist and whatnot.
What is this? Bro, I have not seen a single one of his fucking Instagram stories. I didn't know he was posting about me this much. Oh my God, every day? Every single day? No.
There was that one Instagram story where Ethan Klein was having to evacuate due to the wildfires or something, and he managed to make the post about Hasan and about how Hasan probably thinks it's awesome that his house might burn down, while his families in the background trying to evacuate the wildfires. Just wild. Ethan Klein has repeatedly denied any association with this campaign and Destiny or his community. That may have something to do with the recent credible allegations that Destiny is a sex criminal, but this is false. Ethan has been caught on his live podcast browsing the Destiny subreddit for arguments to use to attack Hassan. Leaked Discord logs show Dan Saltman admitting to exchanging emails with Ethan and the H3 team personally during the campaign. And even if there wasn't evidence of direct communication, the far more important connection is that Ethan is saying the exact same things, using the same out-of-context clips that everyone else used to call Hassan a terrorist or whatever. It's been a group effort. That's just what it is. So just a few final thoughts here. Zionism is Nazism. It's an ethnic supremacist, expansionist, colonial ideology. You can't have Zionism without genocide and ethnic cleansing. That's the end goal of the project. It's what it is. Palestinians are there, and for the Zionist project to be complete, they have to go. Starve them out, bomb them, destroy everything they need to live. Those are the methods. Those are what they're employing as we speak. And like Nazism, Zionism cannot be defeated through reform or debate. It must be destroyed from the outside through efforts made by the Palestinian people, the Palestinian resistance, and coalitions of allies. As history has shown, the downfall of these kinds of racist ideologies is possible, but Zionists cannot be a part of this process. They're Zionists. They uphold Zionism by spreading Zionist propaganda and spending all their time and effort attacking anti-Zionists, even as those anti-Zionists are actively fighting against a genocide that Zionism is the ideological pretext for. In the case of liberal Zionists like Ethan Klein, using his weird personal Zionist crash out as a jumping off point to educate people about the ideology that he adheres to is a great use of time, I think. And Bad Empanada has done a fantastic job with that. His videos have reached pretty wide audiences and exposed them to the reality and history of the genocidal Zionist project. That's a really good thing. That's a really important thing that he's doing, and I think many of you can probably also help out with that. Most of you have smartphones and cameras and TikTok, so go ahead. Start posting about it. Spread the word. Aside from being a morally good thing to do, it's also becoming sustainable. It's algorithmically viable. The Ethan Klein crash out industrial complex is booming, and we can harness it as a propaganda machine to expose Zionism for the genocidal ideology that it is. You may have the feeling, as I often have, that the history books will look back upon these times and those who supported the Gaza genocide with shame and horror. The only problem with that is that these people feel no shame. They're here to make money and to convince themselves that they aren't evil. And the way they do that is by lying, by spreading liberal Zionist propaganda. It's profitable and it's easy and it's acceptable. You're allowed to say that you think all Palestinians should die.
I'm pro-genocide.
And still get invited to Jubilee as the resident liberal. You're allowed to do it and run your quirky, epic, silly podcast and make hundreds of thousands of dollars doing that because the Western media ecosystem encourages it. There will be no justice for the Palestinian people if all we do is watch content about what's happening. Consumption is not politics. There will be no justice for the victims of this genocide unless we all actively fight for it. From the position that most of the viewers of this video have, that's by using the resources and time to continue to speak out, preserve the record of what's actually happened in Gaza, name the perpetrators, and highlight and boost the voices that understand these facts more than anyone in the world. That is, the Palestinian people. Don't stop sharing their stories or contributing to direct aid. I'll leave a document below with some Palestinian voices and outlets that you should follow and campaigns to contribute to. In If I Must Die, Rifat El-Arir tells the story of Yasser Ashur, a young Palestinian survivor of Operation Cast Lead, Israel's late 2008 onslaught in Gaza. During Cast Lead, Israel bombed a UN school, which was also designated a safe zone, killing 44 civilians. Ashur was 14 at the time of the attack, and Israel killed 5 of his classmates and friends. Ever since the massacre, Ashur has tried to honor the memories of his classmates by exposing Israeli crimes. I run a few Twitter accounts with tens of thousands of followers. He said, "The battle for justice for Palestine over social media is crucial, and we have to win it. We don't have Israel's billions, but we have the power of the truth." And that's what we have. We have the truth. October 7th blew the lid off the genocidal Israeli project. October 7th is the reason you're here watching this video today. Israel's response to it has radicalized a generation of people by exposing the Israeli state and its backers in the West for what they are: depraved, ethnic supremacist, genocidal lunatics. That's the truth. We have all these tools to speak the truth, and now's the time to do that. So just do it. I don't know. Don't stop fighting for it. Free Palestine.